So, hello and welcome to session 10 of Talking Asperger's with Andrew. And today I'm going to talk about a very interesting topic, which is one that I have as my 7 steps program for businesses, and that's clarity of instructions, or as I call it, the brief. But before I go into that, I just want to mention that I would like to I am recording this session so that it can be put on my YouTube channel for public use. I hope everyone's okay with that.
Sure.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So yes, I spent 23 years working as a geologist, and by and large, I got pretty good instructions from my bosses as when they were giving me something to do, particularly when I was fresh out of college. And I think it's really important when you're working with someone, with anyone. They don't have to have Asperger's or autism, but it certainly helps with that, to actually sit down with them, take the time to sit down with them and go through exactly what it is that you want them to do. Now, it might seem very straightforward and very obvious, but I have had some experiences where someone's just said, "Oh, we've got this job in, off you go." That doesn't help me very much, because what do you mean off I go? Do you want me to do what we did on the job that was similar to it last time? But does anyone know whether that worked? Does anyone have any feedback from that? So I think it's really important to sit down out of the hullabaloo of what's going on around the office. So find a meeting room, have a cup of tea and a biscuit, have a checklist and say, this is what I'd like you to do, and go through each point by point, clearly, specifically and precisely exactly what you want them to do, what their responsibilities are. Are there any other team members that they're going to be involved with? Is there any computing or IT software that they need to use? And if so, have they been trained? Because there's no point saying, oh, what you want's on the computer over there, off you go. That's no good to anyone. You know, you can't just say the software's on the computer, off you go. You need to have familiarization, know how to use the computing software and who to turn to in the event of a problem. So I very much like this. I call it the brief. And I was speaking to someone earlier this week, and he said actually clarity of instructions was a better title for it. And I think that summed it up quite well. So I was just wondering what you thought about how well or how not well you've been engaged and you've been briefed about what you want to do, and whether that's something you'd like to share.
All right. So my current experience is very positive because I'm currently working with people who are giving me very specific and very detailed instructions. So, for example, they send me emails with all instructions written there, which is very helpful. Sometimes my collaborators may actually have to call me, but they first make an appointment for that phone call. Then they call me and we discuss about one of the courses or the courses I have to lead. So we go through all the documents and then we decide maybe which book I should use. But still I have something written.
That's good.
There, and it's very important for me to have written instructions because I may forget the instructions while they are given, like orally, right? Sometimes I just lose track of what it's said to me. So if there are too many verbal instructions, then I get really confused or I get lost, and then I forget about the first instructions, and I remember only the last ones. And this causes me frustration and anxiety.
Yes, I can
That's what happens.
I can completely understand that, because if you're sitting down with someone and they say, I'd like you to do this, and this, you've suddenly got 5 or 6 or 10 things to remember. And you know, with the best will in the world, we're not going to always remember them all. And so you forget one thing, and it's a crucial thing. And you know, so it's important to be told, to have it. If you're having a face-to-face meeting, have a checklist and just go through each point one by one. And one of the really important parts of that, and this is important for people who have Asperger's or autism, is you need to give them time to answer questions. So you need to say, have you got any questions? And that's where you can have quite a strange moment where the person with autism or Asperger's might sit there and not say anything. And they may sit there and not say anything for quite a little while. And it's not that they're ignoring you, but their brain is trying to process all of this stuff you've just told them. And so they're thinking about, what questions should I ask? And then when they do ask a question, it'll be a killer question. It won't be, be prepared for questions that you won't necessarily have prepared for, because they will be thinking about all the possible outcomes, all the possible scenarios, the what ifs and how ifs and whys of all those things that you've just been through with your checklist. And it might take them a little while to process it. So which is why it's always good to have a cup of tea and a biscuit, because then the person who's asked, do you have any questions, can take a cup of tea, have a bit of a biscuit, and allow the time for that, what they might think is an awkward silence, but it's actually a processing period of time that the person with Asperger is going through in their own head before they then answer the question. And then they may get 2 or 3 or 4 questions, which you can then have the discussion, the dialogue, question and answer. But that first initial, do you have any questions, might be met with a silence. And it's really important to let that silence sit there without getting out your phone and start playing on your phone, or drumming the desk, or going, come on, and all of those things. Be patient and allow the person to process what you've just said. It's really important, because they will then feel as though their time and their input is valued. And of all the things that I've experienced at work, one of the most important things to me is to feel valued. We have an arrangement with our company. I do certain tasks with my expertise and my skill, my qualifications, and you provide me somewhere to work and you pay me money. That's a contract. So you need to allow me to feel valued. I have to feel valued in that when I give you work, I'm not saying we need flowers and chocolate all the time, but that just having someone to take a moment to say, do you know what you did for me last week? I particularly like that point you did, and the point 2 that you talked about. I really appreciated that, because that was good, and we passed that on to the client. That sort of feedback is really important to get, because otherwise you kind of feel like you're just a piece of meat being picked up and put down when someone wants to, and the rest of the time you're out of the way and no one really cares. And you need to feel as though you're valued, and part of that is having that communication at every stage of a project, but it's really important at the beginning. And yeah, I find it quite fascinating how well you can get on with someone once you have had that initial conversation. Doesn't need to be long. If you've got a project that might take them 2 weeks to do, what's an hour? What is an hour at the beginning to sit down and have a cup of tea and a chat? You're building up your interpersonal relationships with that person, so that person understands you, you understand them. You're beginning to find out how they want you to communicate with them, just by this little simple process. And I think it's really important that we do that.
Yeah, I do agree. Well, what can I say more? What I usually do, and that helps me a lot. For example, if I do a training, or if someone is giving me verbal instruction, is taking notes. I remember doing this training a few months ago. It was like the three of us and the trainer. I was actually the only one who was taking notes. I felt a little weird. Was like, okay, I'm the only one who's taking notes. What's wrong with the others?
Yes.
No, what's wrong with me? Maybe. Okay. So, but he helped me a lot to think about all the instructions and actually do the work better, or the way they want me to do it. So it's important. It's important. And I always do that, taking notes if they don't provide me with written information.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really important. I mean, I take a lot of notes when I do things, and
Ah,
and if they don't give you any instruction, I would do the reverse. I would say, you've given me this piece of work. This is what I think you want me to do. And send them an email or a memo. I'm going to do A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these points. Can you confirm this is your understanding of what you want me to do? That way, you've set out what you think you're supposed to do. It's in clear writing and you've sent it to them. I would always copy their boss into that email so that that person, A, knows that you're having a discussion with them, and B, it's showing that you're being professional about what you're doing by making sure that that someone else knows what's going on, so that it's not just you and your supervisor, your manager. So if you don't get clear instructions, write down and say, this is what I think and this is what I'm going to do, unless you tell me something different. And then you see what comes back. But you have to be clear in your own mind, and the best way to do that is to have that conversation with them. But if that's lacking, you set it out yourself, so
mhm,
that in a week's time, when they don't reply to the email, which they probably won't, but they may do, you can say, and they say, well, what have you done? Well, that's not what I wanted. I said, well, I emailed you and I set you out what I was going to do. And then you've confirmed to them what you're doing. And so if there then becomes a problem, it's their problem, and you can try and help them sort it out by going through that with them and saying, well, I said I was going to do this, this, and this. Is that not what
mhm,
you want? And then you would then agree what needs to be changed, or what steps need to be included, or what steps need to be excluded, so that the whole process is formalized and managed and recorded. And that's how I like to work. My Asperger's brain likes to know what is being done. I like to have lists. I make lots of lists, and I check things off, and it's a way of organizing and recording what you're doing. And it's, when I say some of these things to people, they go, oh, surely you mean that there are people that don't do this? There are companies that don't brief people? Yes, I absolutely do mean there are some companies and some managers that don't instruct and don't clarify what they want you to do. And they look at me and they think, no. I said, yes, I know we're in the third decade of the 21st century, and there are still businesses and managers that don't set out what they want you to do. I think it's quite extraordinary that that happens, but it should be part of good management practice. But unfortunately, that doesn't always happen. And,
yeah.
you know, yeah,
Yeah, I had that kind of experience before. Like my previous manager was not giving clear instructions, probably on purpose, because this way, if you make a mistake, it's never their fault,
yes,
isn't it? I
yeah,
mean, it's better for them if they don't give you clear instructions, because if something happens, it's not their fault.
yes.
So yeah, I had that kind of experience, and I was feeling very frustrated and unhappy. That's the reason why I found and I looked for another job, and fortunately I found it, and now it's great, really. It's another story, completely different story.
I think it's important that you have to be
Hmm.
somewhere where you're comfortable, and that all
Hmm.
stems about, how does the environment that I'm in work? How does all of these other people, how does it all fit together? And do I feel comfortable doing what I'm doing? And a key part of that is that communication with those around you and your supervisor, manager, boss, call it what you will. And if you don't have clear, understood, concise, precise, specific instructions, you're left wondering what you're to do. And that's not from a point of, I don't know what to do. That's from a point of, well, I could do it like this,
Hmm.
or I could do it like this. Both might achieve the net result, but there will be slightly different outcomes in that. And so when you have an outcome A and an outcome B, you're left wondering, what do I do? And you can only know what that is if the boss tells you, I want you to do A or B or something else. And having vague and no instructions is it is a recipe for disaster. It's how, as you just said, someone else can relieve themselves of responsibility. Well, it must be their fault. They're the one doing it. But well, actually, hang on. Did you tell them? Did you go through what you wanted them to do? And I have seen some places where managers really don't know how to do that. And certainly in my experience as a consulting engineer and as a geologist, when I was working in that field, there seems to be an assumption that when you get to a certain level of experience within an industry, you automatically become a manager and you can manage people. Now, it's fair to say that there are some people who are naturally gifted managers, communicators, and leaders. And that can be anyone in the ladder, from the lowest rung of the ladder right up to the top of the board level. But it's equally also true, and I've seen it firsthand, that there are some people who, with the greatest respect in the world, couldn't manage their way out of a wet paper bag with a set of instructions. They don't know how. And part of that is they haven't been trained.
Mhm.
And that's another thing that you think, oh, surely managers must be trained on how to manage. No, they don't. They're just assumed. You've suddenly, you've just suddenly assumed you walked into work one day and, he's a manager. and and there's this
True.
assumption that they know how to manage people and teams, and until you understand that management is about communication
Mhm.
and communication is about dialogue, then whether that's written dialogue or whether that's oral dialogue, verbal dialogue, you're not going to get what you want out of a situation. And I I do from time to time, I did, sorry, from time to time, hold my head in despair at the obvious lack of management ability from some senior managers. And you would talk around the office and you, oh, don't worry about him. He's always doing that. That's not a good indictment of the business when other people in your office, your colleagues, also know that he doesn't know how to manage. Surely someone more senior to that must pick up, because there's going to be issues, and it will be that your boss is saying, well, this person doesn't do this, and then none of them listen to what I tell them, and they don't do this, and they don't do that, and I'm always having to chase after them. That actually might be code and a realization that actually the manager is struggling to communicate because they don't know how to do it properly.
Mhm. I have a question, if you don't mind.
Please do.
Okay, so do you think that people with Asperger could be good managers? Because according to your definition, a good manager has good communication skills, but people with Asperger don't really do very well with those. So what do you think?
I think they can actually, and I think it's about order. It's about having order, but it's about having checklists. It's about having emails that set out what you want to do. It's about having that regular conversation with your team members, even if it's just your 3 o'clock in the afternoon cup of tea. How's it going, guys? Have you got any problems? Things like that. That's ongoing, active, positive communication. And yes, you're absolutely right. People on the spectrum can struggle with social interaction and communication. But I think if you go about it in an orderly way and you set out, okay, I'm going to meet my team today. What do I want to talk to them about? And have a checklist. I know I said it right at the beginning, but have an idea of what you, rather than just going to the meeting and you have a free for all and everyone's talking over each other and you've got people being egotistical about things because they want to be seen to be, and you get all of that dynamics going on. If you have order and you have a checklist and you have a specific set of goals that you want to achieve with that discussion, and then you set out checking in points throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the length of the project, and get little reports back from them. Have a weekly progress report from your staff saying, okay, by the end of the week, I want to see how you're getting on. How do you think you're going compared to the overall time scale? Do you think you've met a week's worth of targets? Are you ahead? Are you behind? Have you got any problems? I think having those sorts of systems and processes in place, which are things that we like to have, I think it means you can be good managers. A lot of very senior people in businesses, in fact, some of those who set up the businesses, um, people like Steve Jobs, he probably had Asperger's, and
Mm.
he was innovative and he was dynamic and he thought of the what if questions and he thought of ways to do it. Now, I'd never met Steve Jobs and I don't know how he got on with his teams, but what comes across is someone who is comfortable standing on a stage in front of 5,000 people telling them about this new product. Now, I'm sorry, but there's got to be something good about communication for someone with Asperger's if you can do that. Sorry, go on.
Okay, another question then, because
Yes.
you mentioned Steve Jobs. So, okay, Steve Jobs was a leader basically. So, what would be the difference between a manager and a leader, in your opinion?
Okay, that's a very good question. I think a leader is someone who inspires people to be the best that they can be. A manager is someone who has a focus and a task that needs to be done within a certain period of time. When push comes to shove, a leader will roll up their sleeves, take off their tie and get stuck in and work with you to sort out the problem and resolve the issue and be there on call to help you lead and to lead you in doing it. A manager will dish out instructions, sit back in his office and absolve himself of responsibility until he's got to check in at the end of the week. I think the difference between a manager and a leader is a manager is someone who tries to deal with the setting out of tasks. You're involved in this project, you're involved in this project, you report to him, you do that. There's your deadline and your target to meet by the end of the week. A leader is someone who will inspire the workforce to put in that extra bit, but also when it comes to it, they will be there and they will be part of it and they will contribute and lead and inspire. That's what I would think the difference between a leader and a manager is.
Okay, it is sad that,
Yes, go on.
sorry.
No, go on.
It is said that people with Asperger are natural born leaders. Do you believe that everyone with Asperger is a natural born leader or just some of them?
I think they all have the potential to be leaders. I think it's a question of understanding your own abilities, and a lot of some of the people I've met who have Asperger's really struggle, and they struggle because of the communication, because of social interaction and getting on in teams, but they also struggle because they feel as though their voice can't be heard and isn't heard, and they're scared to stick their hand up and say, actually, I've got an opinion on this and I think we should do it in this way, because they tend to be, I won't say bullied, but they tend to be downtrodden a little, and they tend to have people tell them what to do so that it makes them feel less than they can be. And I think when people who have Asperger's get the opportunity to give the opportunity to speak up and to say what they feel and say what they think, people will be amazed what they come out with, because it will be just like it will be like a light bulb going off, and that they will it will give them the opportunity to speak and be heard, and people say, wow, that's really interesting, we'd never have thought of that. And so I think everyone has the potential to be that. Not all people get the opportunity to do it, and I think that's the difficulty, and that's the struggle that people sometimes have.
One
Yeah, please do.
more question.
Go ahead.
Okay. So I wanted to ask you, what's your personal experience in terms of like did ever happen to you that people consider your opinions or your knowledge less valuable or more valuable because you have Asperger?
Interestingly, I had a career as a geologist before I knew I had Asperger's. I was only diagnosed nearly 7 years ago with Asperger's, and I think with people that I know, they knew that I had opinions and was happy to share that opinion. I think sometimes, if I look back on my career, there were times when people sought me out and said, I want to know what you have to say about this, because you're going to think slightly differently to everyone else. If I want a standard answer, I'll ask to someone else. If I want, Andrew, look, we've got this problem on this site, what do you think about it? That's given me the opportunity to express myself and give my view, which might be different to someone else's. So that only came from having experience, being more experienced at what I did. When I was starting off, it was very much, yeah, would rather you did it this way, would rather you did it this way, do it like this, until you got the experience. And then when you got the experience, people would actually then value your opinion. Hi,
Okay.
hi, Julie, are you there? So we got someone else just joined us. Not sure if Julie can hear me. Sorry, carry on, Laura.
Oh, it's okay. Just wanted to ask you because, um, for example, I mean, you know that I don't have an official diagnosis, but sometimes I feel like my opinion may be considered less valuable because I think differently. So I don't know if it depends on the people we relate to. Maybe people with um, how to say, more culture or a better education, maybe more interested in what we think, rather than someone who has more of a prejudice towards
Yeah,
people who are different. So I never know whether it's well, let's suppose I have an official diagnosis. If I had an official diagnosis, I wouldn't know whether I should say that I have Asperger or not.
mhm.
If that would be convenient or not, because I don't know who I am relating to,
Yeah.
you know?
I think there's part of me that wants to go in one route, and there's part of me that wants to answer it in a different way. The you are who you are, whether you have a diagnosis or not, and
Mm-hmm.
you are Laura. And you have your own way of doing things, and you have built relationships up with the people around you. So in one sense, it doesn't matter that you don't have a diagnosis, because they know who you are, they know what you're likely to say, that you might think slightly differently and give a
Mm-hmm.
different opinion. But there's the other side of the coin where you're not sure whether you should tell people you have Asperger's or ADHD or OCD,
Mm-hmm.
because you don't know how they're going to react about it, and you don't know whether it's going to put your job in jeopardy because
Mm-hmm.
you have this condition. And it's a very certainly in the UK you can't be prejudiced against because you have uh, Asperger's or ADHD or anything. We have something called the Equality Act. Um, so in once it is a difficult thing. I personally would tell people, because I do tell people that I have Asperger's, and I personally would tell my employer, because I want them to understand how we can best communicate with each other. And that would mean, as I said before, about checklists, about emails, clarifying what you need to do, and say to them, you know, this is how it works for me. Because what you're then doing is, in a very subtle, very non-confrontational way, you're training people how to communicate with you in the best way. So you're giving them the cues that you're giving, although we may not realize that we're doing it, we're giving off the social cues, and we're giving off the ways that we would like people to communicate with us, so that comes back to us in the way that we understand best. I think that would be how that I would view that.
Mm-hmm.
Are,
Thank you.
are you with us, Julie? Still can't hear Julie. Let me just have a quick look and see. Nope, nothing there. So that's interesting. Yeah, it is really important to try and help people in communicating with people. The best, we want to be able to communicate what we think in a way that is understood So in doing that, by having our own little set ways of doing it, it helps other people understand, oh, they prefer it if I talk to them like this, or if I ask open questions rather than closed questions. And so all these little subtleties that I freely admit to being not very good at picking up, but I've got better at it. Certainly since I've had the diagnosis, my wife has helped me a lot pick up the subtleties of communication. And so it really is, you're trying to help people understand you so that you can work better in that team, in that environment. And I think that sort of that sort of way of being, and by explaining by explaining that I have Asperger's, people go, oh, okay, how does that work? How do you, because they will have their own preconceived ideas of what someone who has autism or Asperger's has. And you can then try and dispel some of those. Say, yes, that might be true for some people on the spectrum, but with me, it manifests itself in this way. And these are my strong points and these are my weaker points. These are the things that I'm learning how to deal with. And by doing that, you're giving people the opportunity to engage with you in the way that works best for you.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. You said Leslie helps you to understand social cues. I thought she had Asperger too, doesn't she?
No, don't think so. She might have ADHD or OCD, but she not. We're not aware that she has Asperger's. We know that she has some issues in that regard, but no, we're not aware that she has Asperger's. But she may have something on the spectrum in a slightly different way. Yeah, yeah.
I see. I see.
Are you there, Julie? Can you hear
Okay.
us? I'm not sure
So
whether Julie.
Julie is.
I can't see her. She's got a mic off, but so we're getting towards the end of the session, and I can't believe how quickly half an hour has gone. Over half an hour has gone. What I wanted to do is I wanted to let you know, and I know it's just the two of you here today, but I'm putting together a series of programs for business, which are consultancy and training services. So one of the things that I would do is, if you wanted to talk to me about something that wasn't on the show, on the series, I'm quite happy to have an informal chat with you so that we don't record it and it's not put on the YouTube channel. So if there's something that you wanted to talk about that was a bit more private, a bit more confidential, I'm quite happy to have that conversation with anyone
Okay.
on the scene. So if there's anything that that comes up, or you want to talk to me about outside this forum, I'm more than happy to do that. So that's where we are with that. Did you have anything else you wanted to ask me today before we wrap up, Laura, or Julie?
Not at the moment. Maybe later. You
That's
know,
okay. Yeah,
I need to process that.
I like getting your messages on LinkedIn, because it's just what we said at the beginning. It's that pause where you're processing. So you will take your time to process, and you're absolutely fine with that. I love that. I think that's important, that's what I'm here for, is to help in that respect. So
All right.
so I don't usually do this, but I'm going to tell you now what next week's session is going to be about. And it's one that you suggested before Christmas, and you wanted to talk about sensory issues. So next week's session is going to be about sensory issues. So I've got time to have a look and just brush up on a few things there. But so next week is sensory issues on the Talking Asperger's with Andrew. So I don't know whether Julie can hear me, but we're about to wrap up. But if you had any questions you wanted to ask me, then please feel free to get in touch on LinkedIn or email me. My email is info@andrewmarsh.co. So either LinkedIn or on that, and I'll be happy to talk to anyone. So I'm going to shut off the recording.